Time for the final talk of the day. It's one of our keynote speaker. I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Pawel Rzeszucinski to the stage. He is here to help you in a way different to what most doctors do. Although he can't prescribe you some medicine, what he is going to do is help you cure your leadership issues. Pawel, I give you the stage.
Thank you very much, Darren. Thanks for the introduction. And it actually feels so good to be back in Big Data Europe conference. My first one was in 2019, still in person in Vilnius, and I was really looking forward to visiting Vilnius again. But hey, there you go. Maybe next year. I just want to say that I do realize I'm the last thing between you and your evening. So I promise not to talk for the entire hour. I don't think anyone's capable of focusing for the entire hour listening. It's going to be probably around 40 minutes, but I still hope we can use the remaining time to discuss the concepts that I'll be talking to you about. And we've seen already today during the presentations and discussion panels that the commercial flavor of data science is so much more than just extracting insights from data. There's actually a lot of soft skills required. We're talking about communicating with business stakeholders, like managing expectations, clarifying business objectives, or hiring, scarce talent. So there are many different things, many approaches, but the kind of age-old question hiding in between is how to be successful in all of this. So allow me to start with telling you a little bit about myself. I started my education in Poland at Wrocław University of Technology, but at my 5th year, I went to Cranfield University in the UK to study about data and signal processing. And I liked it so much that I stayed on to do my PhD. And at Manchester University, I was working on condition monitoring for Chinook helicopters. I also had a postgraduate episode at Warsaw School of Economics. So when I was doing my PhD, I was doing it for this company called KEYNOTE, which used to be a part of the UK's Ministry of Defence. So this is like a military sector. After returning home, I worked for ABB, which is energy industry, for HSBC, financial sector, then at Codewise, which is on the affiliate marketing side. And now I'm with CentralNIC Group, which is a London-listed internet infrastructure services company. Outside of work, I am a member of Forbes Technology Forum. I've been published by the World Economic Forum. I spoke at European Parliament in frame of the European Internet Forum. And recently I was a member of B20, which is a business arm of G20. And I'm not showing this slide because I think it's a fascinating story. I'm sure there are many people in the room with much more kind of colorful backgrounds. However, what I wanted to show you is that I've observed the data leaders and success factors of data leaders in many different industries and in different backgrounds, in different settings. And even though these people had different definitions of success, but I saw a common denominator. And I want to talk to you today about these denominators. So there are a couple of things that actually brought me to the leadership side of data science and the reason why I actually fell in love with it. First of all, it is extremely important for each and every organization that is serious about data, because you basically get to make recommendations and then generate insight that influences the direction in which the company should move, right? The second one is you just make a real difference. Like watching the suggestions your team makes translate into tangible benefits and growth of the company is extremely rewarding. But because of the way our brains work, it's addictive as well. Another aspect is that you sit, or ideally you should sit in the middle of the organization, talking to everyone around you on the business side, marketing, sales, technical people. And by this, you get to see so much more. And it puts you in a very strategic position to connect people within the organization, but at the same time, deliver data products that just make a difference. And because of this, I think data science is much more on the business side rather than the technical one. And lastly, it is extremely intense. When a proper data culture starts to emerge, people start demanding a lot, which on the one hand is, the essence of what we want to do, but at the same time can lead to, generation of substantial amounts of adrenaline, which again, it's really addictive. But I love this. Now, looking at our market, it also seems to be promising for us data professionals moving forward. If you watched the discussion panel about business aspects of the data science earlier today, you heard some of the statistics. The investment in data and AI continue to grow. The demand for data analytics professionals is going up every year. And at the same time, for example, poor quality of the data is costing like businesses and organizations trillions of dollars. So data-related professions remain in a very good position market-wise to move forward. At the same time, however, we are entering a time when effective interest rates are going up, which might have a little side effect on us as a data community. And I read about this for the first time in the newsletter called The Batch, which is released by the company deeplearning.ai, run by Andrew Ng. By the way, I highly recommend subscribing to The Batch. Andrew was explaining that the increasing interest rates make investors more attracted to short-term incentives, which in turn makes our C-level executives favor short-term projects, okay? Now, this cascades down and puts more pressure on the data teams to demonstrate near-term, kind of tangible solutions. And what this means, we need to be efficient as data teams. Okay, so as a data leader, how can you get more efficient? I think there are essentially 3 areas that need to be considered. First, you have to be efficient as an individual, but also your team needs to be better at what you're doing, as well as the organization in which you work. And I mean this in this very order. Just like, with oxygen masks on a plane in case of an emergency. You first put it on yourself and then on your kids, because the other way around, it's not working very well. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying you should put you in front of your team. I'm just saying, think about how efficient you are and how can you improve before tackling the same thing with your team. So let's start with ourselves, how we as data professionals can be better. And I'm going to start with the concept of failures. Because data science means failures for most of the time. That's a fact. And I think this is great. When Thomas Edison was asked how many times you failed before you came up with this idea of the bulb, he said, well, I never failed, but I just found 10,000 ways to prove that didn't work. And sometime after, in the age of Microsoft, Bill Gates said something similar. He said it's good to celebrate success, but it's so much more important to learn from failure. Because failure is inherent in success. But the important thing is to learn from the failure moving forward. Failure is painful in the short term and kind of inconvenient. But in the long term, if we work through it in the correct way, it will just help us grow bigger. And I think today we are somehow victims of the so-called survivorship bias when thinking about success. So survivorship bias, during the Second World War, the Americans were trying to figure out a way of how to minimize the losses of the bombers, because at some point they were losing quite a lot of them. And they did this initially by analyzing the bullet holes represented by the red dots on the bombers that returned safely to the base. And this kind of seems like a natural tendency, right? But luckily, there were some statisticians in the team, and they said, wait a minute. I mean, we are analyzing the planes that made it safely back. We don't have to focus on the red dots. We should be focusing on the areas where we don't see the holes, the bullet holes. Because thanks to these areas not being hit, these bombers came back. And I think the same goes for the success of the startups. We mainly only hear about the kind of big wins, the unicorns. But it should be remembered that it's only 3 in 5 million startups that become unicorns. 3 in 5 million. And interestingly, often these unicorns are led by people that failed in the past. I'm wondering how many of you recognize this logo, company called Traf O Data. It was actually the first business of Bill Gates and Paul Allen. They were focused on producing some automated reports for traffic systems. They worked on the solution for 1 year, and when it came to the presentation, the device just didn't work. It refused to cooperate. And soon afterwards, towns and cities across the US said, we'll be doing it ourselves. So it completely removed the need for third-party solutions. But when asked after some time how important this experience was, Paul Allen said, well, it was instrumental what we learned to set up proper foundations for Microsoft. So it's good to fail as long as we learn from the lessons and build upon this moving forward. The next aspect is comfort zone. You only grow outside of your comfort zone. And I know we've heard this like a million times from all the kind of coaches out there, and it became a bit boring with time. But the thing is, it's extremely applicable in practice. Why is that? Because we just often don't know what's on the other side of our comfort zone, right? You don't know what options are available to you if you just stay in what's comfortable for you. Wayne Gretzky, the greatest hockey player in the history of NHL, he said, you miss all the shots you didn't take. Stepping outside of your comfort zone is just integral to progress. Let's think about Netflix. What would have happened to Netflix if they stayed in the comfort zone? So Netflix started as a DVD rental company. Had they stayed in their kind of mindset for a longer time, they probably would have ended up just like Blockbuster did. Because Blockbuster has historically been very just reactive to what was happening on the market. Whereas Netflix started to think about streaming service, introduced it, and then Blockbuster a couple of years later tried to mimic it, but just failed. It was too late. Going outside of your comfort zone, it just allows certain facts and solutions to be combined in a way that are not so obvious on the first glance. So when smartphones started to enter the market, who would have thought about using them for machine diagnostics? Smartphones, machine diagnostics? But when you think about it, why not? They have an accelerometer, they have a magnetic field sensor, a microphone to capture acoustics. So during my time at ABB, the team that I worked with conducted a series of studies of using mobile phone to diagnose rotating machinery, and this resulted in a couple of good publications published by IEEE. So looking ahead, today we hear about metaverse. It's the biggest buzzword you can imagine, right? And it's advertised about as this place where most of our kind of digital life will move to. We'll be holding business meetings there. We'll go to concerts in the metaverse. It sounds very cool, but will it really catch on? I think it's debatable. But will it push technology forward and open up new opportunities in, for example, Industry 4.0? Undeniably. I think augmented reality will boost, and it will extend the human intellect with the computing power of machines. And it will just give new dimensions in the approach to, for example, machine diagnostics or medicine. So just stay focused, stay open to what's happening in your comfort zone, but also outside of the comfort zone to grow. Okay, so let's now switch to something a bit different, something to do with our mental health, and something that affects the majority of us. And by saying us, I mean all of us. Tom Hanks had it. Sheryl Sandberg, the until recently COO of Meta, Albert Einstein, Howard Schultz, the CEO of Starbucks, all of them had it, and it's called imposter syndrome. The feeling like a fraud, doubting in your own accomplishments, discounting any positive feedback that you get, feeling like you just don't belong, just being in a constant fear of being exposed as a professional phony. The fact is, 70% of people will experience it at some point in life. Can you imagine 70% of your team not believing in themselves? What's the toll on productivity? It's just unimaginable, yet it's factual. This is what happens. So interestingly, when talking about the imposter syndrome, it is best understood when we introduced an effect from the other side of the spectrum, that it's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. And it's a tendency to overestimate your knowledge in a specific area due to the limited knowledge that you accumulated. So an example, everyone's an expert on current affairs, regardless of what the topic actually is. World Cup, inflation, war. Everyone's an expert these days. The thing is, it takes a certain amount of knowledge to start appreciating the unknowns. So the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns. People that are subject to the Dunning-Kruger effect just didn't get there yet, and they accumulated some knowledge and they think they know it all. On the other hand, imposter syndrome is us. We are way past this point, and the amount of unknowns starts to take a toll on ourselves and our confidence levels. And from my own experience, people in the data field are specifically prone to this type of syndrome. And I see two main reasons for this. The first one is this, the landscape of ML, AI, data startups of 2021. But it's not about the startups themselves, right? But all the little rectangles that you can see on the map. Each rectangle relates to a separate field of expertise. So the pace of development in our field is extremely fast and is continuously introducing cutting-edge tools, libraries, frameworks, But what is the expectation from the outside world? Data scientists need to know about AI, period. Needs to know about frameworks, needs to know about the latest developments, the whole of AI. It's just unrealistic. And the second part about imposter syndrome is this, it's survivorship bias, where we only focus on what we see. In this case, the C-level executives reading all these success stories of companies using AI to increase the revenue or decrease the cost by millions of dollars. But they don't see what's behind. They don't know what's the actual success rate of machine learning initiatives. So appropriate expectation management is the answer. So we know what the imposter syndrome is, but how do we go about this? What can we do about this? It is simple in theory. We have to appreciate that what we are feeling is just a population-wide phenomenon. It's not about you, it's about us. It's our nature and the way we respond to just particular circumstances. We have to understand that the field as a whole will always move faster than we can keep up with. So what I suggest is that instead of trying to catch the entire bandwagon, the entire train, just focus on one carriage and make yourself at home there. Become an expert in this one field. But be careful here. When you become a true expert, other people will start looking up into you and they will start developing their own imposter syndromes, saying, oh my God, he's so good, I'm never going to be able to get to that level. If you start spotting this, just tell them your story if you had the imposter syndrome. There's also a big thing that the organizations should play. And they should encourage senior people to openly talk about their history with imposter syndrome. Remember, 70% of us. So it's majority. And on this slide, you see an example from our field, Lawrence Moroney, who's the AI lead at Google, when asked about the imposter syndrome on LinkedIn, he said, guys, everybody has it. It's not just you. Right, so we talked about you as professionals, how you can be better. Let's jump into the team. But let's stay in the topic of well-being, okay? And for some time, I've been under big impression of this concept that just changed the way how I perceive the well-being of my team. If we look from kind of helicopter level, there are many definitions of happiness, and I'm just sure if I asked every single one of you, I would get that many definitions. But it turns out that no matter what turns us on as people, our brain defines happiness or like feeling of comfort by means of four chemicals. And these are explained by the so-called EDSO model. The EDSO stands for endorphin, dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin. So this model tells us that in order to limit the amount of stress to a minimum, or to decrease the amount of cortisol, which is the hormone of stress, these well-being hormones need to be in balance. And now this may sound like some kind of coachy gibberish, but it actually comes from Simon Sinek, who's an authority in leadership, and he's very heavily focused on military application. What is really appealing to me in this theory is that we can generate two of these hormones ourselves, and they are referred to as the selfish hormones. But we need other people to generate the other two, and these hormones are called selfless. And I think this is especially important in our field, which is rather kind of introvert rich. And it became even more kind of self-centered in the post-pandemic reality. So just quickly go through these hormones. Endorphins are related to physical exercise and laughter. When we laugh, endorphin spikes. Dopamine is activated by just productivity and achieving things. And I think data scientists are very effective at producing dopamine. Because in order to get to the finish line of this lengthy project, we get a dopamine every time we find new insight, new correlation, or we build a new model. On the selfless side, serotonin, it is directly related to human bonding. And in the kind of leadership meaning, it means giving recognition to people. Leaders that recognize the work of their people, of their teams, reinforce the bond between the teams, which is very important. And then the oxytocin, it is referred to as the chemical of love, but it's also related to empathy, trust, friendship, serving others. And the thing about oxytocin, it is highly contagious. Simply viewing someone or watching someone doing good things to others increases our levels of oxytocin. So if all of these kind of hormones are kept in balance, the level of stress is low. What happened to us and our teams in the last few years, during and after the pandemics? So being directly or kind of indirectly isolated, we laugh less, and we do physical exercise less as well. But I'm just going to focus on this humor aspect, because this is related to a workplace much more. If we don't laugh, if we don't kind of banter with people, the levels of endorphin just go down. Again, with dopamine being less exposed to external factors, we tend to be much more hooked on these dopamine hits that we get from our data science projects. And dopamine is really addictive, which is an issue again. Serotonin, we just spend far less time around other peers. And thus we get far less exposure to these casual recognitions. Hey, thanks for that. I appreciate doing this. Thanks for help. That was really good. Similar with oxytocin, we just don't experience these acts of kindness of others. Hey, can I grab you a coffee, or shall we just go to the kitchen to discuss, the game last night? oxytocin goes down. And this imbalance makes the cortisol go up. So as data leaders or leaders everywhere, what can we do to act against this? So just focusing on the selfish side, endorphin, try to create space for this humor. Create this kind of Hyde Park channels on your Slack. And try to get together not only for business reasons, but go out for that beer, go out for dinner. Try to have fun and humor, and your endorphins will appreciate this. Similar to dopamine, just make sure the work-life balance of your team and the people in your team, it's kept to a good level, not to allow them to oversaturate with these dopamine hits only related to work, because this will mean they will just work longer, and with time the efficiency will go down. On the selfless side, serotonin and oxytocin at the same time. Try to promote engagement outside of your teams. So not only discuss within your peers, but ask your team members to go outside and, for example, expect like an active hand-in-hand participation in defining projects with businesses. Have your team members present their work both internally, but also to peers and stakeholders, business holders. And at the same time, encourage physical attendance at places like conferences. I think it's a good practice to always try to motivate people to present their work, because these selfless hormones, it's all about interactions with other people. So when you get to present your content, the levels of serotonin, oxytocin go up. EDSO, very important. Good. But coming back a little bit to the more technical aspects, I truly hope majority of you recognize this book cover. Katie O'Neill. In this book, she tackles many examples of algorithmic bias on production these days. And really the foundation of these biases, which is human bias. It's a highly recommended read. Now, while some people might argue, hey, but data is just kind of indifferent. It doesn't have its own opinion. That's right. But doing data science is a very human endeavor, right? Collecting, processing, analyzing data sets. It just requires a lot of human intervention. And the thing is, it can be really heavily influenced by our own subjectivity. Because when you think about it, throughout our lives, we've just been exposed to a set of experiences, or like a set of training data, if you will, which was very unique to ourselves and just different from experiences of other people. And this naturally leads to a very specific way of perceiving reality, which is just unique to us. So everyone is biased in their own way. And this, just translates to how we, among others, work with the data. But the tricky part about biases is that most of the time we're just not aware of them because, this is who we are. But we can try, and the best first step is just learning about the different types of biases there are. And I'll just outline 3 of them, but there are many more. I encourage you to read up on it. Confirmation bias. So these days we live in the age of information overload. There's just so much information to digest in real time. And because of this, our brains try to defend itself, the pieces of information that we agree with, and exclude other challenging ideas. Most of these ideas that we exclude just stand in the opposition to what our initial or kind of internal hypothesis might be. That's why the name confirmation bias, choosing information that confirms our existing beliefs. When this is taken to extremes, it can result in so-called cherry picking, where just problematically large amounts of information are being discarded. Confirmation bias. The next one, availability bias. So in simple terms, this is a mental shortcut that we take when we need to make quick judgments or decisions. And in these cases, our brain just recollects whatever's the freshest in your mind and makes a decision based on this. If I ask you a question like, are politicians good citizens? I think probably depending on the part of the world where you come from, but in some places you would recollect the stuff that you saw on the news recently, a car accident caused by a politician, maybe acts of betrayal, FIFA corruption. And you would probably say, no, politicians are not good citizens. But, we have to stop and we have to think about it to allow the much deeper memories to come into play and not jump on the conclusion straight away. And the last one that I talked about previously, survivorship bias, is just ignoring the fact of existence of information that's just not available to us at this very moment. So how can we tackle biases? There are a couple of ways. First of all, let's just raise awareness by openly discussing the existence of bias. Let our people be aware that maybe they're not that objective and it's just natural to everyone. On the more technical level, let's be transparent in how we come up with our decisions, on what hypotheses there are based, and how we selected the data so it can be reviewed. Let's also work hand in hand with business just to double validate our understanding of business mechanisms, that our biases did not lead us to assume certain things which are just not true. Very important aspect, aim for diverse teams of professionals, people with different backgrounds, and this just to maximize the exposure to different viewpoints. That's extremely important. And last but not least, just be more open to feedback. It is so much easier for other people to spot our biases than it is for us to do it. Because again, this is just who we are. Right, bear with me. We're almost there because we've discussed two of the three elements that I want to talk about. We talked about how you can be more efficient and what to look out for as data professionals, how your team can be more efficient. Let's talk about the organizations a little bit more. And I think there's no doubt that one of the most important aspects of being efficient as an enterprise is being data-driven or data-led, if you will. And there are a number of surveys and studies that repeatedly show that the principal challenge to becoming data-driven is culture, people and business processes, and not technology. In one of the recent surveys, 92% of mainstream companies report that the main issue to becoming data-driven is the lack of data culture. Crazy. And this is even more difficult in companies that are not data native, companies that treat data just as a byproduct of operations. Now, what is tricky is that one cannot simply announce the introduction of new data culture, with all its policies, strategies, and assumptions, and just expect people to follow. Mostly, they will just ignore it. And if you're too forceful, they may even start to sabotage it. So, introducing change in every population, and organizational population is no different. It follows the bell curve. And a law called the law of diffusion of innovation. Okay, and what it says is that there are roughly 2.5% of innovators in your company. People like Leonardo da Vinci, Thomas Edison, Steve Jobs, people that will just jump on the innovation train straight away. Then you have 13.5% of so-called early adopters, and these are the people that are somehow willing to sacrifice time and attention just to be part of something new and something that reflects their own beliefs. I believe this new data approach will help me do my job better. I want to be part of this. Then we have the vast majority, around 70%. These are very practical people, but very cynical. And the thing is, they will only engage with this new initiative when someone else has tried it first and recommends it. and the end of the bell curve are so-called laggards, and they will only change their ways when forced to. So what the law of diffusion of innovation tells us is that you cannot really achieve kind of global stickiness of your idea or global acceptance of your idea until you reach 15 to 18% of the population, which is called the tipping point. Okay. So organically, you might be able to get to around 10% easily. But it's still a long way for until the 18%, right? So how do you do it? So according to this theory, just ignore the majority, ignore the middle part, ignore the 70%. And this seems rather counterintuitive, right? And this is what most organizations try to do by default. Instead, you should focus on grabbing the attention of innovators and early adopters. Invite them in. Openly ask for help building this initiative. Work together on some case studies just to prove the value of it to the business. You want to try to make them like the evangelists or data champions or data stewards later on, just to promote your idea from the bottom up. When you work on these case studies and try to announce them, go broad. Internal intranet blog, newsletter, town hall, everything that will increase the chances of reaching more people. Because only then you will be able to create this wave of change, and you will start getting attention of the rest of your bell curve. And I think this topic kind of blends nicely with this philosophical concept of the Occam's razor. The Occam's razor states that all things being equal, the simplest solution tends to be the best one, or if you have different hypotheses, the one with the fewest assumptions is the best. So obviously it's not like a foolproof concept, especially in our fast-growing data science industry. But it can help us focus on the root of the given problem and just choose the solution that offers the most direct way forward. So we all know that the technology and algorithms are changing at a very rapid pace. And because of that, we see people that try to go against the Occam's razor. And they try to jump on these newest, kind of complex, modern, shiny algorithms and prefer them over the simple ones. But we have to remember that there is no kind of simple one-to-one correlation between the newest solution and the return for the business. It all depends on the specific problem at hand. And machine learning is a kind of decades-old field and offers many different answers, which can often be just easier to understand, much more explainable, and simply cheaper to run. So Occam's razor to model selection, absolutely. We could also be talking about the Occam's razor in the principle of introducing AI systems to your organization and trying to get to your non-technical colleagues on board with these tools. From my experience, non-technical professionals may have somewhat like a negative sentiment towards modern solutions. They think about AI as this element that will just come and take their jobs, or they just fear that they are not skilled enough to understand these new tools. So if we follow Occam's razor, we should start small, start simple, and just give people the time to get used to the solution. We should be introducing this AI-powered solutions gradually, slowly, provide necessary training, and focus on this aspect of how these people will benefit from it, why we are introducing this, how their job will be easier using these tools. And most importantly, give space for feedback, because when people can kind of shape the solution, they feel in control. but also it helps to create just better and more streamlined products, which are much easier to be accepted. So Occam's razor in the AI introduction, also positive. There is, however, one area where I would not follow the Occam's razor, and we kind of discussed it in the section on biases. And I'm talking about drawing conclusions from data. From my experience, we're just too fast to jump on the kind of easiest explanation, um, forgetting that what we're trying to do is to just to model real life, model the world, and its mechanisms, which are typically, unbelievably complex and outlier driven. So when it comes to kind of analyzing and thinking about correlation versus causality, stay away from the Occam's razor. That's my advice. And just to finish off, we're almost there. I want to bring your attention to this book, which is called Finite and Infinite Games by Dr. Andrew Kars. And in this book, he describes two types of competition in the world today. The first one is finite games. In these games, we have no number of players. We know who the players are. There are fixed rules, and we have an agreed, end goal. So the World Cup is a very good example. A fixed number of teams, fixed rules. The teams are divided into groups. If you leave the group, you get to the knockout stage. The team that scores the most goals in the final wins. Okay, everything is fixed, and these rules define who the winner is. And by definition, everyone else is a loser. Now, in this book, we get to learn about the other type of game, which is called infinite game. In this game, there are both known and unknown players. We don't know the entire landscape. Anyone can join and leave at any time. The rules are changeable. Everyone can change the rules and play as they wish. And the aim of the game is just to play the game itself. Everyone plays just to stay in the game and to support the game so it lasts, so that everyone can play. And what I'm trying to say is that data leadership is an infinite game. There are just so many degrees of freedom and elements beyond our control. Um, it's impossible to win business intelligence. It's impossible to win data science. There's just your definition of success. Um, and all you should be doing is just comparing yourself to yourself from the day before. And when I say you, I mean both you as an individual, but also assessing your team members, and also looking at the products that you create. Just focus on yourself. Don't worry about the outside world, because you just cannot influence it. Right. Whew. I hope you're with me. Just to summarize what we talked about, I was trying to give you some tips and tricks on how to be a more efficient, both as you as an individual, by learning from your failures, by going outside of your comfort zone, and by embracing the concept of imposter syndrome. Everyone has it. I also talked about the team. I introduced the concept of ETSO model and how to look at the well-being of your team from slightly different angle, and be aware of the biases that we can introduce into our products. On the organizational level, the law of diffusion of innovation, how we can start to think about introducing change and big data related concepts to our organizations, and the Occam's razor. Sometimes the simplest explanation is the best, uh, but not always. And just to finish off, try to play the infinite game. There's no end. Try to just to compare yourself with what you are the day before. Here's a list of some of the references that I provided throughout the presentation, and that's it. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Pawel. Really intuitive and interesting discussion, actually. I loved it. And by the way, if you guys do have any questions for Pawel, be sure to hit up the Q&A section now. I mean, I'll just open up by saying, I could really relate to a lot of that. Like my line of business, you're kind of your own boss because it's very freelance based. And I think the part that kind of hit me is the final part you mentioned, play the infinite game. Is I think it's very difficult for us when we put ourselves in those type of situations to not compare ourselves to everyone else and instead focus on essentially just being a better version of what we were yesterday.
Absolutely.
Just seeing if questions come through now. But it's did you kind of struggle with that in the beginning, by the way? Like for you, because I know I did, right? Like it was very difficult early on to not look at what other people are doing because you feel like you need to, right? Like what they're doing works, so you essentially have to find, I guess, a filtration system of what you can take from what they're doing. Otherwise, you're essentially just changing everything about yourself, right?
Yes, it is, and I think it is natural to ourselves. And again, don't get me wrong, we should be looking at other people or other companies, but more on the level of just trying to inspire ourselves. Look what is out there, look what other people are doing, but don't cross the line of trying to compare yourself, because that's just it. It's just bad. It is bad.
It is. I think like one of the things I always remember from my education days is one of the lecturers used to say to me, don't copy, steal. Right? It's the kind of idea, like look at other people, say, okay, that works, but how does it work for me? It's definitely an interesting thing. And I think like genuinely for a lot of us, because we're the most harsh critic for ourselves, it's difficult to kind of see that, right? Like you could be doing similar things to other people and just be frustrated. Well, why doesn't it work? I'm replicating everything they do perfectly.
Of course.
It comes down to that confidence to essentially. I think like one of the other interesting ones is kind of like when you're essentially leaning into the idea of the early adopter, right? Which I think is another way to think of it is niches. But there's something, I don't know about you, but I always find there's something weirdly polarizing about the word niche. Like when someone gets told their product has a niche, it sounds small. But the crazy part is it doesn't have to be small, right? That's something you can easily scale up.
Yeah, absolutely. Niche is just like, something that anyone hasn't thought of this before, but it doesn't really contain the scale aspect in it, does it? So absolutely, yeah, I totally agree on that.
I think most people are kind of just like absorbing what you've said, actually, Pawel. Like, not too many questions coming through. I mean, I think it was quite self-explanatory in a lot of ways, but I'm sure if anyone wants to reach out to you for a little bit of one-to-one or guidance, there's ways to reach you, right?
Absolutely, absolutely easy to find.
Okay, awesome. Well, I won't keep any longer than Pawel. I think you've earned some well-deserved rest. I'm going to get ready to round out the show, but thank you. Absolute pleasure to listen to you. A really informative and insightful conversation that you sparked up there. Definitely one I'm going to be thinking about for the rest of the day, but I'll let you go. Thank you very much. Okay. So that is, of course, our final speaker for the day. But remember, folks, that is only day one. We've still got one more day to go here at Big Data Conference Europe. Get my words together. Sorry, clearly I need to go get a little bit of rest because you know what? There's plenty of information that's kind of boiling around the pot for us, and I want you guys to kind of sit on it. But remember, we will return same time as usual tomorrow. But before I close out the show, I have got to give a special thanks to our sponsors once again, Telia, Amplitude, and Essential, without whom this would not have been possible. Of course, without our guests who came on and spoke throughout the day. Big thanks to them. Many amazing discussions. And remember, there were 4 different channels going on, so you probably didn't catch everything. So maybe you could bookmark that and check it out later. You never know what you'll find. And of course, a big thanks to you guys. The other reason we put this on, if you didn't turn up, probably wouldn't be much of a reason to do it in the first place. We'd just be echoing into the chamber. But because you do return day after day, we are going to be here tomorrow. So go get yourself some rest. When we return, same time as usual, we'll be kicking off with 4 more channels. I think we'll be opening up with a keynote here on the primary channel. And then after that session, there will be sessions going on all 4 different channels simultaneously. So be sure to tune in. Thank you, though. It has been an absolute pleasure. And I'll catch you tomorrow morning.